6 years ago, he dragged a wounded soldier from a collapsing trench. Now, that soldier is a galactic queen, and she just summoned him to court. He thought it was gratitude. It was a death sentence. Commander Ethan Voss received the summons at dawn, delivered by criers who wouldn't meet his eyes. The datapad was heavier than it should have been, gilded edges catching the light like a threat wrapped in courtesy. 6 years of keeping his head down, of frontier patrols and deliberate anonymity, and somehow his name had surfaced in the Keith Royal Court. His captain looked at him like he was already dead. The shuttle ride to the capital took 8 hours. Ethan spent most of it remembering the war. Mud and plasma fire. And the impossible weight of a wounded Keithan officer he dragged from a collapsing trench. He'd never learned her name, never filed a report. Just another desperate act in a desperate war that everyone wanted to forget. The Keith Palace rose from crystalline cliffs, beautiful enough to hurt. Guards escorted him through corridors where nobles paused mid-conversation to stare at the human in worn military dress. He was brought before the throne of reflected stars, where Queen Ashira sat in state. Her long ears adorned with silver thread. Her eyes the color of winter storms. She rose. The entire court went silent. Then she spoke his name, like she'd been saving it for years, and Ethan's world tilted sideways, because he recognized those eyes. Recognized them from a trench 6 years ago, when they had been filled with pain instead of power. The recognition hit Ethan like artillery fire. The wounded lieutenant he'd pulled through hell was now the queen of the Keith Dominion. She descended from the throne, ignoring every protocol, and thanked him publicly for the life debt she'd carried since that battlefield. The court exploded into whispers. Lord Chancellor Venn stepped forward immediately. His long ears pinned back in displeasure, voice as poison as he suggested the Queen's debt to a human mercenary undermined her authority and insulted Keith honor. Other nobles piled on, questioning the story, suggesting Ethan came seeking reward, hinting at manipulation. Queen Ashira raised one hand and the air felt heavier. She invoked the oath of blood saved, ancient law that bound debtor to savior until the debt was honored completely and publicly. Ethan realized he wasn't here for gratitude. He'd been pulled into something infinitely more dangerous. Ashira assigned him quarters in the royal wing, granted him rank of court protector, and promised they'd speak privately once ceremony preparations began. As guards escorted him out, Ethan caught Venn's expression. Cold calculation mixed with murderous intent. This wasn't honor. This was war by other means, and he'd just been drafted. The ceremony became a political minefield. Ethan's aide, a young Keith named Sela, explained that Queen Ashira's reign was fragile. She'd taken the throne after her brother's assassination, survived 3 coup attempts, and ruled a council that saw her as temporary. The life debt wasn't just gratitude, it was strategy, binding a human asset to signal strength through unconventional alliance. But it also painted a target. Venn's faction spread rumors, spy, staged rescue, compromised judgment. Military generals wanted to parade Ethan as propaganda, stripping away his personhood for political theater. Then came the threats, anonymous messages, near-miss accidents in the gardens, whispers about humans who gained the Queen's trust and then vanished. Ashira summoned him to her private observatory, away from listening devices and ambitious predators. Her royal mask slipped, revealing the exhausted soldier he remembered. She explained the truth. She trusted no one here except him, because he'd saved her when she was nobody, when there was no advantage or reward. She asked if he'd stand with her through the ceremony, knowing it made him a permanent piece on this deadly board. Ethan thought about running, about his quiet frontier life. Then he looked at her and remembered dragging her through mud while the world burned, and the answer came easier than it should have. Yes, the ceremony of blood saved filled the Hall of Ancestors, with every major house and half the human diplomatic corps watching via holofeed. Ethan stood beside Ashira in ceremonial armor she'd commissioned, listening as she recounted the battle in detail no one could refute. She named the trench, the date, the artillery pattern, details only someone who'd lived it could know. When she placed the circlet of Detonard on his brow, living crystal that marked him untouchable under Keith law, Venn struck. He invoked the right of question, demanding Ethan prove his intentions through trial by testimony, a legal trap designed to ensnare outsiders in cultural contradictions. but Ashira had prepared for this. She invoked the Savior's choice, granting Ethan the right to name his own reward. The hall went silent. Every eye turned to him. He could have asked for wealth, titles, land on a dozen worlds. Instead, he looked at Ven and said he wanted what he'd already been given, the right to stand beside someone who trusted him, and the chance to prove trust wasn't weakness. It wasn't eloquent, but it resonated through translation systems in ways polished speeches never could. Several nobles looked thoughtful, others alarmed. Ven's expression hardened into murder he couldn't act on without insulting ancient law itself. The ceremony concluded with Ashira's hand resting briefly on Ethan's shoulder, a partnership that sent ripples through both species' political circles. Later, in the observatory's quiet, she asked what he'd do now that he was bound to her court. Ethan admitted he didn't know, but staying felt less terrifying than walking away from the only person here who saw him instead of a symbol. Ashira smiled, tired, genuine, hopeful. She told him remembering someone mattered less.